21 years ago, my father packed my bags, threw them onto the rain-soaked driveway, and told me I was a disgrace who would never amount to anything. Fast forward to last weekend at my nephew's high society wedding. I accidentally bumped into my father near the champagne fountain. He looked at my simple civilian dress, sneered, and whispered loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "If it weren't for pity, no one would have invited you here. You don't belong among successful people." I didn't get angry. I just took a slow sip of my wine and smiled. 5 minutes later, the music stopped. The bride took the microphone, locked eyes with me across the crowded ballroom, stood at absolute attention, and saluted. The entire room went silent as she announced, "A toast to Admiral." Before I tell you how his jaw hit the floor, welcome. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Diana Sterling, and last weekend I turned 40 years old. Standing in the grand ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel, surrounded by shimmering crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, and 500 guests in designer tuxedos, I felt like a ghost walking through a world that had forgotten I existed. The occasion was my nephew's high society wedding, a lavish display of old money and corporate power. As I watched the waiters glide past with silver trays of caviar, a sudden wave of memory pulled me back 21 years. I was 19 years old, standing on a rain-soaked driveway, watching my father, Charles Sterling, throw my duffel bags out of the front door. He had looked at me with pure disgust, his voice booming over the thunder as he told me I was a total disgrace to the Sterling name, an ungrateful disappointment who would never amount to anything in life. My crime? Refusing to let him arrange my marriage to one of his wealthy business partners to secure a corporate merger. He cut me off completely, erasing me from the family tree while my entitled older brother stood in the foyer, smiling. For over 2 decades I stayed away, surviving in a world they couldn't possibly comprehend. But when my nephew tracked me down and begged me to attend his wedding, I agreed, not out of a desire to reconcile, but to see if time had changed them. Walking into that venue in my simple civilian dress, I knew the battle lines were still drawn. The heavy scent of expensive perfume and top-shelf whiskey filled the air as I stepped closer to the center of the ballroom. That was when my eyes locked with Charles Sterling's. Even at 70, my father still carried himself like a king surveying his territory. His silver hair perfectly coiffed, his bespoke suit immaculate. Beside him stood my older brother, Lawrence, holding a glass of scotch and laughing at some inside joke. The moment Charles spotted me, his smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent a familiar chill down my spine. He muttered something to Lawrence, and the 2 men began walking directly toward me, cutting through the crowd of elite guests like predators tracking prey. "Well, well, look what the wind blew in," Charles said, his voice carrying that patronizing, booming tone I had grown to despise as a teenager. He stopped just inches away, looking down his nose at my simple, unbranded dress. Lawrence let out a low, mocking chuckle from behind his glass. 21 years, Diana, and this is how you show up to a Sterling family milestone? You look like you belong in a soup kitchen, not a 5-star venue." Charles leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing with bitter satisfaction as he delivered a line that sliced through the ambient music. "Only pity got you invited, Diana. If it weren't for your nephew's misplaced soft heart, no one would have allowed you through those doors. You simply don't belong among successful people." I didn't flinch. I just took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, looked him dead in the eye, and smiled. My father and brother had no idea what that smile meant. They genuinely believed that after Charles threw me out into the rain, I had spent the last 21 years drowning in failure and regret. They thought my absence was a sign of shame. What they didn't know, what their arrogant minds couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the day I was exiled, I walked straight into a recruiting office and enlisted in the United States Navy. I didn't need their corporate wealth or their hollow family name. I needed a purpose. And I found it out on the open ocean, rising through the ranks by outworking, outwitting, and outlasting everyone around me. While Lawrence was inheriting a comfortable desk job at our father's firm, I was enduring grueling deployments, mastering naval strategy, and commanding hundreds of sailors in high-stakes environments. I earned every single ounce of authority I possessed. Today, I don't just survive. I hold the rank of a highly decorated Rear Admiral, overseeing a massive naval defense project that commands billions of dollars in state-of-the-art military assets. I purposefully chose to wear a simple, unadorned civilian dress to this wedding. I wanted no medals, no uniform, and no titles to precede me. I wanted to see exactly how my family would treat a woman they assumed had nothing to offer. They fell right into my trap, entirely oblivious to the fact that the quiet woman they were mocking held more institutional power than their entire corporate empire ever would. The focus of the room shifted as the soft background jazz faded, signaling that the formal reception was about to begin. All eyes turned toward the head table, where my nephew and his new bride, Victoria, sat under a canopy of white orchids. To my father and brother, Victoria was simply a beautiful, compliant ornament from a wealthy background, a perfect trophy to enhance the sterling family image. They treated her with a patronizing fondness, completely unaware of the fierce, brilliant professional life she had led before entering their social circle. Charles had even boasted earlier that his grandson had tamed a wild one. They had absolutely no clue who she really was. Before she met my nephew, Victoria had built a stellar career as a brilliant young officer in naval intelligence. Her trajectory had been sharp. But a year ago, a massive bureaucratic sabotage threatened to destroy her entire career. She was facing ruin until a legendary mentor in the military intervened, dismantled the false accusations, and sponsored her promotion to a specialized joint task force. That mentor was me, Rear Admiral Diana Sterling. Because I always kept my military life entirely separate from my toxic biological family, Victoria had never connected my name to her new, arrogant in-laws. She knew me only in uniform, as a force of nature who saved her life's work. As she scanned the sea of faces in the ballroom, her eyes suddenly landed on me, sitting at a distant table. I saw the exact moment recognition hit her, her breath catching as she realized her savior was standing right here. The formal proceedings began as Charles stepped up to the microphone, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. He looked out over the crowd of dignitaries, politicians, and business tycoons, raising his glass with theatrical flair. For a solid 5 minutes, his speech was nothing more than a grandiose boast about the Sterling family legacy, our immense corporate wealth, and how we only associated with the absolute topmost tier of society. He even managed to throw a subtle, mocking glance toward my distant table, making it clear to anyone paying attention that he considered me a stain on his perfect evening. When he finally finished, the room applauded politely, and Charles smirked, thoroughly satisfied with his own performance. Then, Victoria stood up and took the microphone from him. The chatter in the room died down as the beautiful bride prepared to give her speech. Charles smiled, expecting a sweet, submissive thank you from his new granddaughter-in-law. But Victoria didn't look at him. Instead, her posture shifted dramatically into a rigid military stance. Her gaze swept past the VIP tables, past her own parents, and locked directly onto me at the back of the room. The entire ballroom went dead silent as she raised her right hand to her temple, snapping a crisp, flawless military salute right toward me. Charles's smirk instantly froze. The crowd gasped in confusion as the bride stood at absolute attention, her voice ringing out with immense power through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stand. a toast to Rear Admiral Diana Sterling, a true hero of our nation. The atmosphere in the room shattered instantly as a collective gasp rippled through the 500 elite guests. I watched my father's face drain of all color, turning a ghostly shade of gray as his jaw literally dropped in sheer disbelief, perfectly mirroring the deep shock that was now spreading across the room. Beside him, Lawrence froze mid-sip, his eyes bulging as he stared back and forth between the saluting bride and the sister he had just ridiculed. The utter confusion lasted only a second before the real shift began. At the front tables, a United States senator, a federal judge, and 3 prominent corporate CEOs, men Charles had spent the entire evening desperately trying to impress, suddenly stood up. They turned toward me, their faces filled with profound respect, and raised their glasses high. Within moments, the entire ballroom followed their lead, a massive standing ovation echoing off the walls for the woman they had all assumed was a charity case. Charles's hands began to shake violently as the crushing weight of reality finally set in. He realized that the daughter he had exiled, the woman he claimed only got in out of pity, held more institutional power, honor, and genuine respect than his hollow corporate empire ever could. As the applause subsided, he stumbled backward off the stage and practically ran toward my table, Lawrence trailing behind him like a terrified child. "Diana, we didn't know," Charles stammered, his voice trembling as he desperately tried to force an apologetic smile. "This is incredible. Why didn't you tell us? We need to sit down, talk about the family business, and celebrate this together." I stood up calmly, looked down at the pathetic, trembling old man who had once tried to destroy me, and delivered a freezing, dignified rejection that permanently shattered his pride. "You were right, Charles. I don't belong among your crowd. I belong far above it." I didn't stay for the rest of the reception. I quietly turned on my heel and walked out of the Grand Regent Hotel, leaving Charles and Lawrence standing in the wreckage of their own arrogance. Over the next few weeks, the shockwaves of that night tore through the family. Word traveled quickly through their elite social circles about how the great Charles Sterling had publicly humiliated a highly decorated Rear Admiral of the United States Navy, only to be utterly crushed by his own daughter's success. Their corporate partners began distancing themselves, disgusted by their behavior, and Lawrence's position at the firm quickly crumbled under the weight of his new reputation. They were left with a hollow empire of regret, realizing they had traded a true national hero for a lifetime of bitter pride. As for me, I returned to my peaceful life of true achievement, completely unaccountable to anyone but myself and the country I serve. My father's hollow wealth could never buy the honor, loyalty, and deep respect I earned on the open ocean. Today, I continue to lead, mentor the next generation of brilliant officers like Victoria, and build a lasting legacy that means something real. Now, I'm curious about you who listen to my story. If your own family turned their backs on you and threw you out into the cold, would you hide your ultimate success just to see their true colors, or would you flaunt it from day one? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. Until here.